the German army's experience with alcohol during the First World War was much more varied than their Allied counterparts on the Western Front. This was in due part to the strong degree of regionalism within the German Empire and its army. Units from Bavaria were much more likely to be issued beer as part of their daily ration than units from Prussia or the wine-producing regions of the Rhineland. The German home front also had to deal with food shortages due to an increasing demand for foodstuff, key to alcohol production like potatoes, barley, sugar, and wheat. This shortage eventually affected those on the front line as well. When the German army invaded Belgium and France in August 1914, many soldiers took advantage of the opportunities that these newly conquered territories had to offer. Discipline in the rear echelon units were pretty lax to say the least, and Hermann Baumann, a baker in the 7th Reserve Corps, recalls his unit discovering an empty house on the 4th of September 1914. The house contains 500 bottles of wine in the cellar. Half of his unit became drunk and 4 men, including Baumann, took 30 bottles to carry with them during the advance towards Paris. German supply units were horse-drawn at the time, so looting on this scale would have been impossible for the infantry. Half of his unit became drunk and 4 men, including Baumann, took 31 bottles to carry with them during the advance towards Paris. German supply units were horse-drawn at the time, so looting on this scale would have been impossible for the simple infantry. On the 8th of September, Baumann's unit discovered a cellar with 15,000 liters of wine. He later recalls discovering the wine cellar full of wine barrels. His fellow bakers, supply train drivers, and even candlestick makers, probably, tried several barrels until they found something good. They then destroyed so many wine barrels during their search, and the subsequent reveling in all this wine made their boots turn red as they waded through 20 centimeters of wine in the cellar. Baumann's wine-soaked adventures in the supply train came to an end with the German defeat at the Battle of the Marne. On the 26th of October 1914, Baumann recorded his unit receiving 1/4 liter of cognac for every 10 men, which was the first alcohol his unit had drank in 6 weeks. Baumann's orgy of intoxication was not the typical frontline soldier's experience. Normally, every soldier in the trench received one of the following, which was half a liter of beer, 1/4 of wine, or 125 milliliters of brandy or schnapps. Schnapps and wine appears frequently in most German accounts of trench life. The machine gunner and expressionist artist Otto Dix recounts the war experience as lice, rats, barbed wire, fleas, shells, bombs, caves, corpses, blood, schnapps, mice, cats, gas, artillery, filth, bullets, mortars, fire, and steel. The author on Lozui claims it is possible to fight a war without women, without ammunition, even without strong points, but not without tobacco, and not at all without alcohol. Eric Cormy remarks quite on the Western Front, depicts alcohol in the trenches. For the most part, he portrays Paul Baumann and his fellow soldiers drinking beer instead of wine or schnapps. Most often, remarks depict scenes of men just on leave a few kilometers behind the lines, such as in this scene depicting the canteen between Baumann returns from the line, or Baumia. As we drink, I look at them in turn. Over us hangs a dense cloud of smoke. Where would a soldier be without tobacco? The canteen is his refuge, and the beer is far more than a drink. It is the token that a man can move his limbs and stretch in safety. We do it ceremoniously. We stretch our legs out in front of us and spit deliberately. That is the only way. How it all rises before a man when he is going away the next morning. During the early 1920s, Remarque also wrote lovingly about schnapps. There is no exaggeration. It is easier to write about the psychology of women than it is to write about schnapps. Schnapps has soul. In 1924, he wrote about snap cocktail recipes in a Hanover publication. His portrayal of schnapps and the open love for the drink were mentioned as a part of the right-wing backlash against him as a banal author of unpatriotic anti-war novels. Other novelists recalls alcohol's presence in the trenches. Ernst Junger's diary begins with an account of being issued cacao for the 1915 New Year celebration. In his post-war novelization of his war diary, Storm of Steel, Junger mentions being issued with schnapps, beer, and wine. He discusses downing several bottles of red wine in a dugout after an artillery barrage and spending the last of his money on wine during the preparations for the ill-fated 1918 spring offensive, because there was nothing else that his comrades would spend money on. Junger's Storm of Steel is also noteworthy because Junger describes the experience of combat as a rausch, or intoxication. His portrayal of combat as intoxicating was an example of Younger trying to emulate the rage of Achilles in the Iliad, but this association set him apart from other war novelists. Younger's relationship with war, alcohol, and intoxication would continue throughout the 20th century. He was stationed in Paris during World War II and records his experiences on the fringes of the resistance movement, Vive la France, and in the heart of the French literary scene. One of his most famous passages from the time recalls an event where he stood on a rooftop, enjoying a glass of wine and strawberries as the Parisian skyline exploded during an aerial bombardment. In the post-war era, he experimented with LSD and recorded its effects in Annos Sugarin, Drogen und Roche. As the war dragged on, Britain's naval blockade of Germany created a nutrition crisis and a food shortage among the civilian population. Foodstuff became scarce and raw materials such as potatoes, barley, sugar, and wheat were necessary ingredients for alcoholic beverages. This pamphlet claims that the civilians should be eating barley bread instead of drinking beer, and that brandy production was literally taking food out of the mouths of starving German children. The blockade of German imports would be continued until the spring of 1919, prolonging the starvation crisis and the food shortage. The nutrition crisis and the food shortage also affected those soldiers on the front line. During the 1918 Spring Offensive mentioned above, or the Kaiserschlag, German troops were suffering from a lack of supplies compared to their Allied counterparts. Although the Spring Offensive resulted in an initial breakthrough for the attack soon stalled as the German troops captured Allied supply depots and began to gouge themselves on foodstuff that had become so rare due to the Allied blockade. Troops especially discovered caches of wine much as they did in 1914 and began to celebrate this ill-fated last gasp. This last gasp of the German army in 1918 quickly exhausted itself and the soldiers simply stopped advancing. As the war ended and German society moved into the 1920s, a new era of intoxication arrived. During this period, cocktails, the jazz age, swingers, and the underground narcotics trade gained prominence in the New Republic as they danced on a volcano. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. Wash your butt and keep safe.